Here's the ugly truth nobody likes to admit. About 90% of catastrophic engine failures come from poor maintenance or blindly following those manufacturer-approved service intervals that are designed to sell cars, not save them. So today, we're cutting through the noise. We're giving you 13 proven mechanic-backed habits, the same habits used by drivers whose cars blew past 700,000 miles without a single major repair. Yes, 700,000. Let's get into it. Your engine runs at high speed with thousands of metal components rubbing against each other, generating an insane amount of heat. Oil exists to handle two things: lubrication and cooling. But once oil degrades, loses viscosity, absorbs moisture, fuel, and dirt, it can no longer do its job. And when oil is pumped through the engine without the ability to protect it, you already know what comes next: friction, heat, then sludge. Sludge isn't just ugly, it clogs tiny oil passages that feed critical components. Wherever lubrication stops, failure begins. That's why you should change your oil every 3,000–5,000 miles. So why does the manufacturer manual say 10,000 miles? Well, that's true if you live in a 70-degree laboratory, with no traffic jams, no stop and go, no extreme temperatures. But if you pay attention to real American conditions, Texas heat at 110 degrees, Minnesota at 20 degrees, Los Angeles traffic where you sit still for an hour, and daily short trips, you'll realize these are the exact situations that destroy oil the fastest. Changing oil at 3,000 to 5,000 miles isn't overkill. It's the cheapest insurance to keep your engine alive for a few 100,000 more miles. Simple, cheap, effective. Short trips sound harmless, but they're actually silent killers of engine oil. If your drive is under 10 minutes, the engine never gets hot enough to burn off moisture and fuel dilution. The result? Water and gasoline mix into the oil, viscosity collapses, and sludge forms far faster. And most Americans drive exactly like this: dropping kids at school, stopping by Walmart, commuting 10 minutes to work, grabbing Starbucks. All of that kills oil much faster than a long highway drive. A car that doesn't drive much, but only does short trips. It still needs early oil changes, sometimes even earlier than someone who drives more. Cold starts aren't any kinder. About 70% of engine wear happens in the first 30 seconds after you start the car, before you even turn on the radio. In states where winter is so brutal that oil becomes as thick as fridge syrup, the oil pump struggles to push it through the system, and during those moments, the engine is running nearly metal to metal. Live in a cold region? Forget about the 10,000-mile dream. You need earlier oil changes just to compensate for the massive cold start wear. Then there are trucks and SUVs, symbols of America, and also some of the best oil-destroying machines ever made. They tow trailers, haul heavy loads, run long highway trips, and operate under higher engine load than sedans. Most also use turbocharged engines, where oil faces extreme heat and pressure. For trucks, the 3,000–4,000 mile interval is far more realistic if you want the vehicle to hit 500,000 miles without a rebuild. If you've ever thought a filter is a filter, then it might be time to rethink that. Cheap filters all share one thing in common: they're engineered to give up early. The internal media is thin and easily clogged by heat, sludge, or fuel dilution. Once the media gets blocked, the bypass valve opens, and you already know what that means. Unfiltered oil goes straight into your engine. Imagine washing your face with dirty water for 5,000 miles. Whatever your face would look like, your engine will look the same. When bypass happens, everything inside the engine begins wearing out exponentially faster. Metal particles are tiny, often too small to see, but they can scratch bearings, grind piston rings, and eat away cam lobes little by little. You won't hear strange noises, and your check engine light won't come on. But a few years later, your car suddenly feels weak. Compression drops, acceleration feels sluggish, oil consumption increases. People blame the automaker, the turbo, the weather, but the truth is much simpler. The cheap filter has been quietly killing the engine for years. The American market is filled with turbo and direct injection engines. Ford EcoBoost, GM 2.0T, Subaru FA20, and many more. Turbos spin at 180,000 to 250,000 RPM and rely on perfectly clean oil to survive. Direct injection produces far more soot and fuel dilution than old-school port injection. Put these two together and you get the harshest environment an oil filter can face. Cheap filters are simply not designed for this. That's why OEM or premium filters are completely different. Their media is thicker and made from synthetic or blended fibers that can trap particles as small as 20 microns. The bypass valve is precisely calibrated so it doesn't open too early. The anti-drainback valve is made of silicone instead of cheap rubber that turns into a brick during Minnesota or Wisconsin winters. And the overall construction is much stronger, so the filter won't collapse under high-pressure spikes. Cost-wise, a cheap filter is $4 to $7 USD. An OEM or premium filter is $12 to $20 USD. The difference is $6 to $10 per oil change, while your engine is worth anywhere from $4,000 to $15,000 USD. You don't need to be a financial expert to see which choice is smarter. If engine oil is the blood of the engine, then automatic transmission fluid, ATF, is the blood of the transmission. And unlike real blood, it doesn't regenerate, it doesn't rejuvenate, and no miracle is going to restore it after thousands of miles of traffic, towing, and heat. Your transmission operates entirely on hydraulic pressure and the cleanliness of the ATF to ensure every shift happens instantly and as smoothly as butter. But the moment ATF starts to degrade even slightly, the entire system begins its downward slide. And then, to reassure you, someone says a phrase millions of Americans have believed for decades: lifetime fluid. A promise that sounds soothing, almost like those zero-calories ads that somehow still make you gain weight. The irony is that America, home of long highways, cross-state road trips, and a weekend trailer towing culture, is one of the harshest environments on Earth for ATF. Mountain driving in Colorado or Washington is basically high-intensity cardio for your transmission. Constant downhill braking, holding low gears, temperatures climbing every minute. Then comes towing, a very American hobby. Boats, campers, jet skis, you name it. While you're happily cruising toward the lake, your ATF is being cooked from the inside. But that's not all. Live in the Midwest? Congratulations! Winter turns ATF into something as thick as fridge honey. Live in Arizona or Nevada? Even better. ATF becomes thin like spring water at 110 degrees Ing. Both extremes destroy hydraulic integrity, yet people still believe in lifetime fluid. Then one day, your loyal car begins to send SOS signals. Awkward shift jolts, a 1-second delay when shifting from P to D, a light vibration at 35-45 mph like you're driving on a wooden bridge. And if you ignore all of this, the ATF will slowly destroy the clutch pack, wear down the solenoids, and guide you toward the final destination of this so-called lifetime journey. A $3,500, $8,500 USD bill for a rebuild or a full transmission replacement. You think coolant is only for cooling? Think again. It's a precise mixture of water, ethylene glycol, and corrosion inhibitors. Tiny chemical guardians whose job is to protect your entire cooling system from rust, scale, and self-destruction. Once these inhibitors degrade, coolant stops being the silent hero and literally begins transforming into acid. And nothing on your vehicle likes acid. After 3 to 5 years, all coolants eventually reach the same fate. They oxidize, and their pH drops. Once coolant becomes acidic, it will corrode everything it touches: water pump, radiator, heater core, thermostat housing. All of this happens quietly until one day you look at your garage floor and see a long puddle. Or worse, your temperature gauge shoots straight into the red while you're cruising on the highway. That's when you realize you've let things go far too long. In hot states like Florida, Texas, and Arizona, coolant degrades much faster because of 95-115 F weather, heavy traffic, and non-stop AC use. Each heat cycle oxidizes the coolant faster than you'd expect. That's why sometimes the fans run, but the engine still overheats, or the water pump leaks, even though the coolant level looks fine. And in Minnesota and Wisconsin, completely different story. At 20 degrees Celsius, if your coolant ratio is even slightly off, the water portion can freeze and crack the engine block. Once that happens, you're staring down the possibility of replacing the entire engine. old coolant also corrodes the impeller inside the water pump. When the pump weakens, your engine will overheat even if the reservoir is full. This is the trap many European and Japanese cars fall into when operating in American conditions. So why 3 to 5 years? Because all coolants rely on inhibitors, and those inhibitors degrade with heat and time. Manufacturers saying 7 to 10 years? In the US, with extreme hot and cold climates and heavy traffic, that interval simply isn't realistic. Vehicles that reach 400k, 700k miles all have one thing in common. They get their coolant replaced regularly. Spark plugs are the smallest parts in an engine, but they're where everything begins. Even a slightly weak spark is enough to turn the combustion chamber into a half-cooked kitchen. Unburned fuel, engine shaking, and eventually misfires. And misfires don't just make your car run like a lawnmower. They directly destroy the catalytic converter, the one part every American hates replacing because its price feels like a month of rent. When a misfire happens, that unburned fuel goes straight into the catalytic converter. The cat already operates at extremely high temperatures, and when raw fuel enters, it ignites inside the converter. Temperatures can exceed 1,800 degrees Celsius, enough to melt the catalyst brick inside. The result? Sluggish performance, bad fuel economy, and the dreaded P0420, P0430 codes everyone hates. But the spark plug story doesn't end with misfires. In the US, many trucks use long-reach spark plugs. F-150, Silverado, Tundra. The long plug improves combustion efficiency, but it's also a death trap if you don't replace it on time. Leave them in too long, and carbon buildup around the plug threads will weld them to the aluminum head. When you try to remove them, you risk breaking the plug, stripping the threads, or worst of all, having to remove the entire cylinder head. Many American car owners also believe highway miles don't matter, so plugs last longer. Sounds familiar, right? Completely wrong. Highway driving doesn't save spark plugs from long heat cycles, and carbon still builds up the same. That's why many people confidently run past 100k miles and then end up sighing when the plug seize so hard they won't budge. 60,000, 70,000 miles isn't a random number. It's the point where the plugs haven't seized yet, but the electrodes have worn significantly. Even though manufacturers advertise iridium plugs for 100k, 120k miles, real US conditions, heat, cold, traffic, towing, idling, degrade spark plugs much faster. What happens if you don't replace them on time? Hard cold starts, rough idle, fuel trims off, carbon buildup in the intake, and eventually a burnt catalytic converter. A set of spark plugs costs a few $dozen, but if left too long, the repair bill can quickly make you think, maybe I should just sell this car. In the era of modern fuel injection, the fuel filter is no longer just a little screen for fun. It's the only barrier standing between your finely tuned fuel system and a pile of debris from the fuel tank. Rust, metal dust, tiny fragments, all are trying to enter your fuel pump and injectors. And with direct injection, where pressure is higher than your blood pressure after seeing a US repair bill, even a single small particle can cause misfires, loss of power, or annoying engine vibration. Not replacing the fuel filter on time is like forcing your fuel pump to go to the gym 24/7. A clogged filter, pump works overtime, fuel pressure drops, the car hesitates under acceleration. Then you begin hearing the fuel pump whining, like it's begging for a day off. And of course, when it finally dies, you'll be handed a bill of several hundred to over $1,000, especially on trucks and SUVs. Because in America, anything associated with truck magically costs twice as much. And don't forget another painful truth about the US market: ethanol. From E10 to E15, even flex fuel, ethanol is at nearly every gas station. The problem? Ethanol absorbs moisture, causes phase separation, increases sediment, and even worse, it pulls all the old rust and debris from the tank. Think highway miles keep things clean? Not quite. Ethanol residue still collects in the filter. Buying a used car? Good luck. Old fuel tank plus new ethanol. A mass migration of debris straight into the filter. And modern Ford, GM, and Toyota injectors are so tiny they look like needles. One overdue filter is enough to clog them instantly. The reasonable replacement interval is 30,000–40,000 miles, but if you live in a high ethanol area or drive an aged-like bourbon vehicle, it's best to replace it earlier. A few signs that may be screaming at you to replace your fuel filter include loss of power when towing, vibration at steady speeds, loud fuel pump noise, or a check engine lean code. Replacing the fuel filter on time gives immediate benefits: smoother engine operation, longer injector and pump life, and better fuel economy, especially for trucks and SUVs that are already thirsty by nature. More importantly, it prevents the nightmare scenario of standing on the side of the highway with a trailer behind you, while your engine decides to shut off because it lost motivation. Brake fluid is something most American drivers only remember when the brake pedal suddenly feels as soft as a marshmallow and their $6,000 LB SUV starts rolling down a hill somewhere in Colorado. But in reality, brake fluid is the lifeblood of the entire hydraulic braking system. It's responsible for transmitting force from the pedal to the caliper and keeping brake pressure stable. The problem is, all DOT 3.4 and DOT 5.1 are glycol-based, which means they will absorb moisture over time no matter how well you maintain your car. Once moisture starts creeping in, the boiling point of the brake fluid drops significantly. When the brakes heat up, that moisture turns into vapor and creates vapor lock. The result is a soft pedal, poor feedback, and longer stopping distances, something no driver wants. This is the single biggest reason why changing brake fluid regularly is not optional but mandatory. Moisture will cook your braking system faster than you think. In the US, this issue gets even worse due to extremely diverse driving conditions. In Florida, the year-round humidity destroys brake fluid quickly. In Utah or West Virginia, endless mountain descents heat the brakes repeatedly on the way down. The combination of heat, humidity, and downhill driving creates the perfect environment to turn old brake fluid into a real safety hazard. And, not to forget, cars in the US aren't just for commuting. Millions of SUVs and trucks tow trailers, boats, campers, putting thousands of extra pounds onto the braking system. Skipping brake fluid changes also means you're welcoming corrosion. Moisture rusts calipers, eats brake lines, and slowly kills the ABS pump. Once the ABS pump fails, the repair bill is enough to make anyone reconsider. Keep towing that favorite boat. Or sell it and avoid the financial headache. If the ABS light flickers on and off, that's not a joke. That's a warning signal the system has been sending you repeatedly, but you probably ignored it. Signs of worn brake fluid are also easy to notice. The brake pedal becomes soft and travels deeper than before. Braking power drops noticeably when going downhill. The fluid turns dark brown or black, and the ABS light appears in that gentle but persistent way. Typically, the proper interval to change brake fluid is every 2 to 3 years. However, if you tow often, drive long mountain descents, live in the Rockies, or frequently drive in hot and humid conditions, you should change it even sooner. If you ask 10 American drivers how often they change engine oil, 9 of them will answer clearly and confidently. But if you ask when they last changed their differential fluid or transfer case fluid, they'll look at you like you just spoke an alien language. The funny thing is, these two components are the metal grinders quietly destroying thousands of F-150s, Silverados, and Rams every year, simply because owners never touch their fluids. The differential distributes torque to the wheels and handles massive loads every time you accelerate, tow, climb hills, or cruise on the highway at 80 mph, which many U.S. drivers love to do. The transfer case divides power front to rear in 4WD AWD vehicles, and it works constantly whether you notice it or not. Every time AWD sends extra torque to the front wheels on slippery roads, every time you twist the 4H4L knob just for fun, that little box is carrying loads most drivers never think about. The fluid in these components is far from just for show. It lubricates huge hypoid gears that endure heavier pressure than the engine. It carries heat out of the housing. It protects gear surfaces from wear, pitting, and scoring. Things that, once they appear, mean you should start opening your wallet. But when gear oil degrades, everything starts falling apart. The oil thickens, extreme pressure additives lose effectiveness, and metal shavings float around like a sandstorm in the Arizona desert. So, when should you replace the fluid? For differentials, the standard interval is 30,000–50,000 miles if you tow, off-road, or drive at high highway speeds. If used normally, you might stretch to 60,000–70,000 miles, but normal is rare. Most American drivers don't realize that just driving 75 miles for an hour a day is enough to push the diff into high-temperature zones. For transfer cases, the interval is 30,000–60,000 miles, depending on the drivetrain, but trucks used for heavy work should definitely follow the shorter cycle. If you hear rear axle whine, notice the diff running unusually hot after parking. See oil leaking around the seals, or find that switching between 4WD modes becomes difficult. Congratulations! Your vehicle is saying, "Please change the fluid now." Don't ignore it, because rear axle whine doesn't magically disappear. It only transforms into a $1,500 or $3,000 repair bill. These habits aren't opinions. They're proven mechanic-backed practices pulled straight from real-world vehicles that survived 500K, 600K, even 700K miles without turning into retirement-age lawn ornaments. Your car isn't fragile, but it's also not magically indestructible. It only lasts as long as you let it. So if you want your car to outlive your mortgage, and maybe even your patience, start with just one habit today. One change. One decision that saves your engine thousands of miles of silent damage. Now tell us, which habit have you been skipping? Be honest. Finally, please note that the content in this video is drawn from publicly available sources, vehicle manuals, and automotive research. It is meant purely for educational and informational purposes and is not intended to endorse any specific brand or product. Always double-check information, follow your vehicle manufacturer's recommendations, and make informed decisions when performing maintenance. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.